All right, Jamon Moore, Alex Morgan here. We are doing a special Ask Me, or I guess us, anything, uh, regarding what's been going on recently with the Quakes preseason. There's a lot to talk about. We asked our patrons for some questions, and man, Alex, did they deliver? We've got a lot of them. But let's get into some of the news because there's a couple, big pieces of news. You've been asking for a club president for some time. It was one of your asks back when we were talking about the general manager. You were very adamant that you wanted to see that replacement for Tom Fox. Today, the Earthquakes delivered, or at least John Fisher delivered, a new president, Jared Shawlee, I believe well-deserved. Let's hear from you. How do you feel about the promotion of Jared Shawlee from COO to president of the Earthquakes?
I think this is a great move for the Quakes, Jamon. I mean, I've been beating this drum for a long time. I've always thought that there is a lot of talented people in this organization, in the front office, but it felt like they were lacking a hierarchy, an organizational structure that worked for the team and allowed them to make decisions. And, I think that for a long time, it was sort of hard to see what the chain of accountability was. When Jesse Fioranelli was fired, the club had no one come step forward and explain the decision for weeks. Eventually, it was Jared Shawlee who stepped up to the plate and answered some of our questions. But in the fallout of Jesse Fioranelli's firing, I think that really revealed a lot of the issues that this club had with that organizational structure. And now that Jared Shawlee is president, I think that fixes this issue. There's a clear hierarchy now of Matias Almeida reporting to Chris Leach, reporting to Jared Shawlee, reporting to John Fisher. And we know who to go to get answers. We know who has accountability in this club. And I think that's a positive thing for this organization and for all of the fans of the Earthquakes.
They seem to be knocking these things down. Obviously, naming Chris Leach as the general manager was one. Naming Jared as the president is another. We've seen now partnerships start to get introduced. Roku with the latest partnership that's going to provide some in-stadium experiences with fans. The news article from Yahoo, which actually got a statement from Shawlee for the article, so it was a article that was done with the Quakes knowledge and put out there by Yahoo. Mentioned that there are several technology deals still to come, high-tech companies that the Quakes are doing business with. First, they had Avaya back in the day. I guess that's a technology company. Intermedia came along, and you have them. But now they're starting to hit some of the heavy hitters, between PayPal and Roku. I'm really interested who else is in this pipeline between Jared and also the vice president of strategy, Ian Anderson. They really seem to be finally starting to get the high-tech companies that fans have asked for the longest time to support this club. I think these are some really positive developments. I think it's probably one of the good reasons why Shawlee received this promotion.
Yeah, and I think this has been a long time coming, Jamon. I mean, the Earthquakes are the Bay Area's Major League Soccer team. Obviously, they should be searching for partnerships with local tech companies. I think that's just a no-brainer. And I think the credit goes in large part to Ian Anderson for finally making that happen. He was the one who spearheaded the deal with PayPal last year. And he was also given credit, I think, for helping negotiate and work out this deal with Roku. So I look forward to see what more partnerships are in the pipeline, because I think that the more corporate deals that the Quakes can make, the more resources that they have to make off the field improvements. And when you're talking about a new training ground for the club, when you're talking about refurbishing Avaya Stadium and adding a new supporters terrace and on the field improvements, all of those things, this is going to help improve.
Agreed. And let's set the corporate stuff on the side. What fans really want to talk about is what's going on with this team and the signing of a new designated player. Well, new to the Quakes, not new to MLS. Jamiro Monteiro, an intra-league designated player transaction. Don't see that very often. $250K in GAM, an international spot worth of another pretty much $250K in GAM. On the market for this, as these things have happened this past season. The Quakes actually sold one already for that price. And then another $200K in incentives in 2023. Jamiro is one of only 4 players, including Christian Espinoza, with 6 assists in every season since 2019 in Major League Soccer. That does include secondary assists, which I'm not a huge fan of, but that's okay. That's the way Major League Soccer works for these numbers. But what do you think about this signing? It seems like a really interesting deal, and this is a player that's got some flash, some on the ball skills, and has the ability to press, and has the ability to really kind of make some exciting things happen on the pitch. What's your take on this deal?
Look, I think fans have been asking for, we've been asking for another strong addition to this offense for a long time. And I think that, a lot of us have been thinking about that as foreign international signing, somebody coming in from abroad, from South America, from Europe, and improving the offense in that way. But I think Chris Leach has pulled off another smart interleague transaction here between Abobasi, between Grey Goose, and now Montero. I think he's really flexing his muscles and pivoting their transfer strategy from South America in those regions to local domestic players. And I think this is a great signing, Jamon. I mean, you look at the contributions that he's made in Philadelphia. A lot of Philadelphia media members and fans have been saying that Montero was one of their best players over the last 3-4 years in terms of talent. And, I think lately in the last year, he might have found himself sort of not really fitting into their big picture system, but at no point has his talent ever been in question. And he's just the kind of creative player who I think can get this offense really running. I mean, we've talked about how this offense has struggled to move the ball around since Magnus Eriksson left in 2020. And the way I see this is kind of finally replacing Magnus Eriksson and getting attacking midfielder in there who can move the ball around, who has been described as a metronome and moving the ball forward and giving that creative spark, and also working hard off the ball to win it back. So I think this is a great piece for the Quakes to add. Now, the question is where he fits in exactly, because now it seems like the Quakes have a lot of options in that offense. At forward, they have Benji Kikanovic, they have Jeremy Abobasi, who are both options. In the number 10 position, now they have Chofis and Montero. On the left wing, they have Cade Cowell. On the right wing, they have Christian Espinosa and a bunch of depth players underneath them. So the Quakes now have a lot of options, and that makes me optimistic about the trajectory of this team this year.
So let's start to get into some of these questions. I think that was a good intro, because we're going to need to talk about things like lineups and stuff, or at least the fans are putting us on the spot to do it. So let's see what they got for us. Our first question comes from Robert. He asks, what do you think is the projected starting lineup then against the Red Bulls in 2 weeks with Montero added to the roster? Now, you have put together, from your trip to preseason, you got to see the Quakes play. Was it Ventura County SC? Is that what it was?
Ventura County Fusion SC. Yes.
Fusion SC. Okay. All right. So let's pull this up. And how do I do this again? Well, it's right here, and I'm trying to do it. And it's
there. We
go. We can see it there. So talk to us through a bit of the lineup here. I'll turn off the overlay and make it a little bit easier to see. Talk to us through the lineup here. Obviously, there's a couple pieces that are missing for sure. The one thing we're not going to see here is Montero, and Jeremy Abobasi wasn't available on this particular day. How do you think this will translate into a starting day lineup at this point?
Look, so the big revelation that I learned when I went to the preseason game against Ventura County Fusion was that Matias Almeida was using a 3 at the back system. And that was something that the Quakes have been talking about, have been hinting at for a while now. When we talked to Chris Leach a couple of weeks ago, he had mentioned that Almeida was experimenting with these new systems that might alleviate the need for a new right back. And the Quakes haven't added a right back in this transfer window. And so this system, I think, is a really good way to play without having that right back there. Jackson Ewell was starting at center back, but they also had played with Nathan in center back and moving Judson out to the right center back. And look, we don't know whether this is how Almeida will line up on open day against the Red Bulls. But we know that this is one of the options that he has. The other option, of course, is sticking with the 4-2-3-1 that he's used throughout his time in San Jose. And so it could be either one of those, I think. But the thing that really appealed to me about this formation was that it allowed the Quakes to take advantage of all the pace that they had up top, with Cade Cowell on the left wing and Christian Espinosa on the right wing. I think they struggled last season to utilize both those players and maximize their talents and their pace. But this system gave them lots of space to run, lots of space out wide to get the ball, to get cutbacks in the box. And so that's what I see as being the benefit of this system. And I think that, Abobasi could also take that number 9 position. As you say, that's something that could change. Marcus Lopez obviously wasn't there. He was on international duty. So he could play at one of the wingback positions. He could play at left wingback position as well. Calvo is another player. He could take that center back spot from Ewell. So there are lots of different ways, I think, lots of different pieces that could move around. But I think this is a good option that the Quakes have. And I guess the biggest question for me at this point is where Montero fits in. Because if they're playing with this formation or if they're playing with the 4-2-3-1, in both formations, there's a sort of competition between Chofis and Montero. I think it's got to be one of the two of them. I'm struggling to think of a way in which they can both get in the lineup together. I don't think Chofis is as effective as a wingback. I don't think he has the sort of pace or stamina to get up and down the wing, play in that wingback position. I think he's best in the center of the park. Even in a 4-2-3-1, I think his best position is a 10. And so it's going to be a competition between them. And I think that signing Montero might have been a move to offer cover for Chofis, because we know that his loan is going to expire this summer. And it might be a move that Chris Leach is thinking about as, what the next step is, what the long-term solution is for the Quakes at that number 10 position, looking beyond Chofis. So I guess that's the big question for me, is that number 10 position right now.
This is a bit of a stab, and we do have a couple more preseason games coming up here, including one, I believe, against Sacramento Republic, in which we might get a better idea as to what the opening day lineup could look like. But for me, I think Eric Remedi is the odd man out in the midfield here. I think once you plug in Calvo to the back line, I don't see Remedi keeping his spot. I think the most you're going to fit in is between Gregush, Judson, and Ewell. And then I don't know that Montero is going to be an opening day starter. He's only going to have a couple weeks to integrate to the team, might not even be full fitness. He was not in camp for the Philadelphia Union. So that's an indicator he's not going to be at full fitness. That means he's missed their preseason games as well. My guess is they start the season with Chofis and in the middle. And that, we'll have to see what that means in terms of Espinosa and Cowell. Does Espinosa become a wingback on the right? Does that put Marcos Lopez as a wingback on the left? How do they then fit in Cade Cowell? I think those are some questions there. But if you're in a 3-5-2, you're likely going to have that attacking mid and still going to have 2 forwards. So I could see it being something like Chofis, Cowell, and or Kikanovic along with Abobasi up top, if assuming everyone is healthy for day one. Okay, excellent.
Yeah, just briefly, I also don't see Montero being a day one starter. We've seen Matias Almeida in the past usually take a while to integrate those new players into the lineup. Preseason camp has been very important for him. And so I don't see Montero starting day one because he missed preseason. I think Chofis is going to be given that opportunity to earn that spot and to prove that he can be that number 10 before we see Montero, making a claim to that.
Okay, let's get into the next question. Comes from Matt. He says, any updates on Quakes 2? Will we be getting player announcements soon? I checked in with the club yesterday. The announcements are coming. They're looking, I believe right now, trying to get approval through the PRs. There are a number of PRs. So again, going back to the Yahoo announcement that there are more partnerships and stuff to announce, the way that the PR team sounds like everything is setting up is they've got a stream of announcements coming out pretty much every day between now and the start of the season, and they're just trying to lay out the order of things. So we will get Quakes 2 announcements soon. we may not get them by the first game of the season. And the reason for that is it doesn't sound like the first Quakes 2 game will be until early March. So they've got just a little bit more time if they decide they could actually do an announcement around the Quakes 2 team afterwards. But I'm hearing fans at PayPal Park will be allowed to watch the team play. I'm also hearing that likely we won't see like double header days because of the game time starts and the field situations and such. Likely you'll see something more like back-to-back days. So like a Friday and a Saturday, or a Saturday and a Sunday, kind of depending upon where the MLS game is falling. You'll then see the MLS Next 2 game, MLS Next Pro game, Quakes 2 game fall into one of those slots. More than likely, this also should provide some convenience from a travel perspective, so that when the team travels, let's say to Houston, the Quakes 2 team goes along and they play the Houston game as well, and it probably will defray some of the travel costs, at least to be able to do some co-traveling. That's what I'm hearing. We'll kind of see how it all plays out. It might not go exactly as I said there, but that's the announcement. Anything you want to add on Quakes 2, Alex?
Well, there were Quakes 2 players training with the first team, and there were Quakes 2 players there in preseason camp in Santa Barbara. Quake spokesperson said they weren't ready to make those announcements yet, but I expect them at some point in the near future. And look, building out a Quakes 2 team is not a flashy decision. It's not going to be a huge
it's not gonna blow your mind.
Draw. It's not going to blow your mind. It's not going to probably bring in a ton of revenue, but I do think it's a really important part of building out this organization, and will allow the first team to succeed even more, because it gives the front office a lot more flexibility in terms of signing young players and moving players around. I think this will help probably alleviate some of the stress of international slots, because there are going to be international slots that the Quakes can use on the Quakes 2 roster. So for reason, I think this is a super positive development for the Quakes.
Yeah, you have Asumani, you have Buddha, you have Agrin. Those are all players who are probably candidates, at least, that they could put those international spots into the Quakes 2 team if they need to have international spots in the roster. We do know that Chris Leach has indicated that there is at least one more signing coming. We talked to him. He said the outside back position was a place that they were looking at. I've heard a couple different things. I've heard it could be a couple more players. I primarily heard through my sources that we're likely looking at one more defensive player that might be a little bit position agnostic. We'll kind of have to see how all that goes. There's been some talk about center back. There's been some talk about outside back. It's possible we get someone who can do a little bit of both. Matias Almeida, as we know, likes his defensive position flexibility in his players. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. Back to our Slack. Kevin asks, do we see Haji get more than 4 appearances this year? Alex, what do you think? Does the new setup benefit Haji now that maybe a couple players that were ahead of him are no longer in the roster? It's starting to get crowded again up top.
I don't see Haji getting more than 4 games this season, Jamon. I just think there's too many players ahead of him in that depth chart. And I think that Almeida would probably rather draw upon some of the younger academy players, players like Buddha, players like Will Richmond, than Haji. We just haven't seen Almeida put any trust in Haji. He seems to be skeptical of his defensive capabilities. And so obviously I'd love to see Haji succeed, but I think I'm setting my expectations pretty low just because of his relationship with Almeida over the last couple of years.
I mean, maybe that's a reason to show up for a Quakes 2 game is get to see more of Haji.
Exactly.
Good chance we will see him. And I think the video that they shared yesterday of him surrounded by players that you didn't fully recognize is an indication that that's where we will see him in the coming season. But obviously, I think what's great is that there now will be a way to be able to see some of these players that we see less of. And hey, might create more fervor to see some of these players in the first team if the first team isn't performing and the second team players are. So that could always get interesting. Moving along here, who loses the most playing time with Montero? Who's the odd man out when Montero's on the pitch? What do you think, Alex? Who loses the playing time to fit him in?
I think it's Trophies. I think that it's a zero-sum competition between them for minutes. That's really how I see this lineup taking shape. I think, as you said earlier, I think Remedi could also be an odd man out in the midfield just because they have a lot of midfield options at this point. I think that the money they're spending on Grey Goose, I think that his experience and his talent really means that he's going to be sort of the centerpiece of this midfield. And so I see him as taking Remedi's place in there. So those are the two players that I kind of see being pushed to the sideline this season.
Okay. I think we've talked about the lineup, so I think we got Vega's question. Andy Thomas says, most season previews or most season preview things I've read seem to place the Quakes as a bubble playoff team. Do you think Montero raises the ceiling of this team with respect to playoff contention, and how much?
I think something you said in our patron Slack a couple days ago really resonated with me, Jamon. You said that Montero is the kind of signing that raises the floor of the team. I don't know if he's going to raise the ceiling. I don't know if this signing will make the Quakes number 1, number 2 contention team in the West, but I think he does raise the floor. And I think that looking at the Quakes lineup right now, I feel fairly optimistic that they're going to be in playoff contention. They have the talent to be in playoff contention. I think the biggest question at this point is the coach. It is Matias
100%.
Almeida and his ability to take this team and get the most out of it. I don't think there's any question at this point that this is a well-built roster, that they have the pieces to succeed. I think that foundation is there, and now all the pressure's on Matias Almeida. And if it doesn't work out, I expect Chris Leach is going to have to make some tough decisions and going to be pretty decisive, because this is a good year for the San Jose Earthquakes to make the playoffs. I think that's got to be the expectation for them heading into this season.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that this maybe makes it so that they're not going to fall below a certain level. Like 10th place, even with the addition of Nashville, seems lower than I expect this team, to finish for this season. How much upside? I think you're probably going to have to come back for our season preview Aftershock show in order to get the full opinion from everyone as to where this team is going to finish this season. So a plug for a show that we intend to do next week for the preseason show. Come back for that. Andy had one more here. What do you think are the realistic expectations of minutes and production from Benji, provided that the team itself stays relatively healthy? Do you think we'll see him be a rotational starter, injury sub, or do we expect he'll get more time and increase in all categories based upon his performances from last season? Someone at the end of the season, there's very few players that had stock up in this team as much as Benji Kikanovic did, but it seems like there's just so much talent now in that would be playing in the positions he's at. With Jeremy Abobasi at the 9, he's competing with Cade Cowell, and now Buddha's come into the team, and we know he's quite talented. They've and then with Montero and Shofi's trying to find a place. Like, I'm worried Benji's a little bit of the odd man out for a bit in all this. And, it probably hinges on how good of a preseason he's had in Almeida's eyes. Where do you think Benji fits right now?
I think that's an open-ended question, Jamon. I think that a lot of the league and sort of league-wide national analysts have been assuming that Jeremy Abobasi is going to be the main man in this lineup, because they've seen what he's capable of doing in Portland. They know the talent that he has, the aerial ability that he has, the way he can distribute the ball up top. And so I think that a lot of those analysts have been, pegging Abobasi in as a guaranteed starter up top. I'm not so sure about that. I know what Jeremy Abobasi has done in Portland and what he's capable of, but he hasn't proved it in San Jose yet. And last season, the guy who was getting consistent goals and performing for San Jose was Benji Kikanovic. He was not a guy that we talked about at this time last year. He was not on my radar at all, but he showed so much growth over the course of that season. By the end of the season, they were really relying on him to get that offense going. And so I think that he's a contender. I think that it's going to be a tough battle between him and Abobasi for that number 9 position. And the other thing about Benji is that he can also play out wide left. He can also compete with Cade Cowell for that left wing spot if Cade's not performing up to the standard that we're expecting of him. So I think that Benji Kikanovic is going to get opportunities this season. I think he was one of their brightest players last season, and I expect to see him get considerable minutes and contribute to this team in 2022.
Yeah, my concern with Abovisi is consistency and staying healthy. And if either of those don't happen for him, then that's the opportunity for Benji Kikanovic to really kind of step in and take the 9 spot as his own.
In my head, Abovisi is not a guarantee at this stage. I think that's still an open question.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with that sentiment right now until you see him play a full season in Major League Soccer at the 9 position, and really kind of get those 2,000 plus minutes doing it. But that being said, we've got time for one more question, so let's knock this out quick, Alex, because we do have to run. The follow up to that, I think, is a good one from Aaron. He says, who's going to lead the Quakes in goals scored this season, and how many will he score? Matt Doyle this morning projected Abovisi at 15 plus goals. That's an interesting projection given what we just talked about. Who's going to lead the Quakes in goals, Alex? Particularly if you only have a half season of Showfees.
I think it's really hard to say, Jamon, because I think the goals are going to be pretty evenly distributed throughout this team. They have a lot of goal scoring threats. They have Cade Cowell, they have Abovisi, they have Kikanovic, they have Espinosa, they have Montero, they have Chofis, they have Grey Goose. All of those guys can put the ball in the back of the net.
Not to mention Calvo and Beeson and Nathan on set pieces.
From set pieces.
They finally have some size that, and all those guys can head a ball.
Exactly. This team is very well rounded. I see goals coming from all of those spots on the field. So it's hard to say who's gonna be the leading scorer. I think at this stage, Jeremy Abovisi is probably your best bet. But I think that 15 goals is a lot to ask of him. I could see him scoring double digits. I could see Benji getting to double digits. But I'm not sure if there's going to be any one player on the team this season that's breaking 15 goals, that's getting up to that 20 goal mark. I'm a little skeptical of that happening.
Alex, good to talk to you again. We will do this again next week in a live format, we hope. And fans, check out the latest article about money and players. How much money should teams spend on a designated player, and kind of looking at Montero and is that a good deal or not. So check that out on Quakes Epicenter. Patrons can have access to it. Right now, Alex, again, thank you for coming and doing this with me. And we will talk to you again pretty soon.